I am Ethan, 30 years old, and I flew 9 hours to attend my dad's 60th birthday. Despite paying for their hotel rooms, I found myself seated at the corner table away from everyone. My sister Rachel smirked at me, saying, "No one actually likes you. They just feel bad." My mom nodded in agreement. "You are not even supposed to be here." With unexpected calmness, I raised my glass and said, 20 seconds. At 5, my cousin covered her mouth. At 10, my uncle stood. At 20, my mom stilled, whispering, "It is true." Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever dealt with family drama. Trust me, what happens next will show you exactly how to handle it. My life in Seattle was comfortable. As a senior software engineer at a growing tech company, I had finally reached the point where financial worries were a thing of the past. My downtown apartment overlooked Elliott Bay, and on clear days I could see all the way to the Olympic Mountains. I had built this life entirely on my own without any help from my family. In fact, despite my success, the relationship with my family had always been strained at best. When my phone rang that Tuesday evening in April, I was surprised to see Dad on the caller ID. We typically spoke only on holidays and occasionally on birthdays, so an unexpected call was unusual. "Ethan," my father said, his voice carrying that familiar formality that never quite softened even after 30 years. "We are planning a big celebration for my 60th birthday in Florida next month. Your mother thinks you should be there. Not we want you there, or I would like you to come. Just your mother thinks you should be there." Classic Dad. Still, I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. Maybe this milestone birthday would finally be the opportunity to bridge the gap that had always existed between us. "I would not miss it, Dad," I replied, trying to keep the eagerness out of my voice. "Just tell me when and where." He gave me the details. A weekend in Miami where my sister Rachel and her husband had recently moved. The whole extended family would be there. Uncle James and Aunt Patricia, Uncle Peter and his kids, Cousin Emma, and her husband, Cousin David, and several other relatives I had not seen in years. After hanging up, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, contemplating what this invitation might mean. Despite years of being the family afterthought, I still yearned for their acceptance. My father had always been emotionally distant, a workaholic who showed his love through financial provision rather than affection. My mother followed his lead, treating me with a detached politeness that sometimes slipped into passive-aggressive criticism. And then there was Rachel, my sister, 3 years older and eternally the favorite. She had mastered the art of maintaining her golden child status while subtly undermining me at every turn. Growing up, she had an uncanny ability to twist situations, making me appear ungrateful, difficult, or inconsiderate, especially when my parents were watching. Still, this invitation felt like an olive branch. Perhaps turning 60 had made my father reflective about his relationships. I decided to approach this with genuine optimism. The next day, I booked my flight from Seattle to Miami, a grueling 9-hour journey with a layover in Dallas. But I wanted to do more to show my family I cared despite our difficult history. I called the luxury beachfront hotel where the celebration would take place and reserved rooms for my parents, Rachel and her husband, and Uncle James, who was on a fixed income. 5 rooms for 3 nights at $400 per night, $6,000 total. It was a significant sum, but I could afford it, and I wanted to make a gesture that could not be dismissed. For my father's gift, I spent weeks tracking down a rare vintage watch that originated from his small hometown in Illinois. It had taken extensive searching and cost $3,000, but it was exactly the kind of meaningful present I hoped would touch him. The night before my flight, my best friend Marcus came over to help me pack and share a beer. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, watching me carefully fold my newest suit. "Last time you saw your family, you came back and did not leave your apartment for a week." He was referring to the disaster 3 years ago when I had flown home for Thanksgiving. Rachel had accidentally spilled wine on my girlfriend's dress. My mother had interrogated her about her intentions with me, and my father had spent the entire visit glued to his phone or television. My girlfriend broke up with me 2 weeks later, citing the family dynamics as a major red flag. "This is different," I insisted. "Dad is turning 60. This is important to him and I want to be there." Plus, I have a good feeling about this time. Marcus looked unconvinced, but raised his beer bottle in a toast. To optimism, then. Just remember you have people who actually value you back here. I nodded, appreciating his concern, but determined to give my family one more chance to show me they cared. The journey to Miami was even more grueling than anticipated. My 5:30 a.m. flight from Seattle was delayed by 2 hours due to mechanical issues, which meant I missed my connection in Dallas. The next available flight was not until 4 p.m., leaving me stranded in the airport for nearly 6 hours. I used some of that time to text Rachel, letting her know about the delay. "No problem," she replied. "Dad and Mom are not arriving until tomorrow morning anyway." This was news to me. I had assumed we would all be arriving on the same day, having dinner together on the eve of the big celebration. "Who else is already there?" I texted back. "Me and John, Emma, and her husband, Uncle Peter, and the kids. We are going to dinner at that new seafood place tonight." I stared at my phone, a familiar sinking feeling in my stomach. They had clearly planned a pre-celebration dinner and had not thought to include me. Or worse, had deliberately scheduled it knowing I would be stuck in transit. "Save me a seat," I texted, attempting to sound casual. The reply came 20 minutes later. "Sorry, already made reservations. Tight seating. We will see you tomorrow." I spent the remainder of my airport time browsing news sites and trying not to dwell on what was already starting to feel like a mistake. The flight to Miami was turbulent, both literally and emotionally. Seated next to a mother with a crying infant, I found myself envying the child's ability to openly express frustration without social consequence. During the flight, memories of past family gatherings played through my mind like a disappointing highlight reel. My high school graduation, where my parents left early to attend Rachel's impromptu art exhibition. My college graduation, which my father missed entirely due to a critical work meeting. Every Christmas, where my gifts seemed hastily purchased afterthoughts compared to the thoughtful presents given to my sister. Yet beneath each memory lay a stubborn hope that things could change, that some gesture or achievement on my part might finally win their genuine affection and respect. When I finally landed in Miami at 9:45 p.m., I turned on my phone to find 0 messages asking about my arrival. I had mentioned to both my mother and Rachel that someone might need to pick me up due to the late hour, but apparently that request had fallen on deaf ears. The taxi from the airport to the beachfront hotel cost $80, another unexpected expense on top of all I had already invested in this trip. The night air was humid and heavy, as I checked into the hotel, confirming that all the rooms I had paid for were properly reserved. "Yes, Mr. Morrison," the receptionist said cheerfully. "We have your family's 5 rooms all taken care of through Sunday. Your parents will be arriving tomorrow. Is that correct?" I nodded, too tired to feel much about the fact that no one had bothered to update me on the arrival plans. As I waited for my room key, I spotted my sister and her group returning from their dinner. They were laughing loudly, clearly several drinks into the evening. Rachel saw me and detached from the group, approaching with the artificial smile she reserved for public family interactions. "You made it," she exclaimed, air-kissing near my cheek. "We just had the most amazing seafood. You should have been there." "I tried," I reminded her. "But you said reservations were full." "Oh, right," she said dismissively. "Well, we are all going to the beach tomorrow morning at 9. Try not to be late." Before I could respond, our father appeared from the hotel bar looking exactly as I remembered him, tall, imposing, with newly silver hair that somehow made him appear more distinguished rather than older. He gave me a brief nod. "Ethan, good flight." "It was delayed. I missed my connection. Spent 6 hours in Dallas," I replied, hoping for at least a sympathetic response. He said, checking his watch. "Well, travel these days. Your mother is already in the room. She was tired from playing cards with the Johnsons all day." The Johnsons were their neighbors back home. Apparently, my mother had found time to entertain them, but not to inform me about the changed arrival plans. "I thought you were arriving tomorrow," I said. My father looked confused. "Who told you that we got in this afternoon? Rachel picked us up." I glanced at my sister, who suddenly became very interested in her phone. Another of her small manipulations, ensuring she got exclusive time with our parents before I arrived. "Well, I am here now," I said, forcing a smile. Looking forward to celebrating with everyone tomorrow. My father nodded absently, already turning back toward the bar. Big day tomorrow. Should be good. That first night alone in my hotel room, I stood on the balcony listening to the ocean waves and seriously contemplated booking an early return flight. 9 hours of travel, thousands of dollars spent, and so far I had received nothing but indifference and subtle exclusion. But something kept me there, perhaps the same stubborn hope that had brought me to Florida in the first place, or perhaps a growing sense that this time needed to be different, one way or another. The next morning I woke early and headed down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast, determined to start the day with a positive attitude. I spotted Uncle James sitting alone at a table near the window and felt a genuine smile cross my face for the first time since arriving. Unlike the rest of the family, Uncle James had always shown me real affection and interest in my life. "There is my favorite nephew," he exclaimed, standing to give me a bear hug. "When did you get in?" Rachel told everyone you were arriving this morning. Another small manipulation from my sister. "I got in last night, actually. Late flight." Uncle James shook his head. "Nobody picked you up. That is not right. You know your father would have gone if someone had told him." I appreciated the defense, but doubted its accuracy. We were soon joined by Aunt Patricia and Cousin Emma, who greeted me with the polite enthusiasm people reserve for distant acquaintances rather than family. "Ethan, you look." Professional Emma commented, somehow making it sound like an insult. Emma had always been jealous of my career success, having bounced between various multi-level marketing schemes herself. "Still working too much." "I enjoy my work," I replied simply. "How are the essential oils going?" She flushed slightly. "I have moved on to wellness coaching, actually. Much more fulfilling." Breakfast conversation revealed that the day's activities had been fully planned without any input from me. A beach morning lunch at a trendy restaurant, shopping in the afternoon, and a casual dinner at the hotel. Rachel had organized everything, positioning herself as the dedicated daughter, ensuring perfect birthday celebrations for our father. When the entire family gathered in the lobby for the beach excursion, I quickly realized my role as an afterthought. Seating in the rental cars had been arranged without accounting for me. Beach chairs and umbrellas counted without my inclusion, and lunch reservations made for one fewer person than necessary. "Oh, Ethan can just pull up a chair," Rachel said dismissively when the lunch issue was pointed out. "They will not mind." At the beach, I found myself consistently excluded from family photos. Whenever I approached a group conversation, the topic would awkwardly shift or die altogether. During one bathroom break, I returned to find my beach towel had been moved from the family circle to a spot several yards away. The most revealing moment came when I overheard Rachel speaking to Cousin Emma behind a beach umbrella, not realizing I was approaching from the other side. "Mom specifically told Dad not to invite him," she was saying in a hushed voice. "But Dad felt guilty because of the promotion or whatever. I made sure to schedule most of the important stuff for yesterday before he arrived. He seemed so desperate to be included," Emma replied with a laugh. "Did you see his face when Uncle Peter did not save him a seat in the car?" "Just wait until tomorrow night," Rachel said. "I have him seated at the reject table with Great Aunt Mildred, who cannot hear, and Cousin David, who nobody likes." "Does he know he is giving a speech? Everyone else prepared something." Rachel snorted. "No, and he is not. I took him off the program. Dad does not even want to hear it." I backed away silently, my chest tight with a familiar pain. So this was how it was going to be. Another family event where I was systematically excluded and belittled. But this time something felt different inside me. Instead of the hurt swallowing me whole, I felt a strange clarity beginning to form. After lunch, I begged off from the shopping expedition, claiming I needed to pick up some last-minute additions to my father's gift. In reality, I needed time alone to process what I had overheard and decide how to proceed. Walking along the beachfront shops, I ran into Sarah Johnson, an old family friend who had known us since childhood. She seemed genuinely pleased to see me. "Ethan, your mother mentioned you might not make it. I am so glad you came after all." This was news to me. Why would she think I would not come to Dad's 60th birthday? Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Well, she mentioned something about you being too busy with work and that family events were not really your priority." The familiar narrative, Ethan, the absent son, too self-involved to care about family. A complete inversion of reality, but one my mother had apparently been spreading. Sarah, can I ask you something? I ventured. Has my family ever mentioned financial troubles to you? Her expression changed, becoming guarded. Why do you ask? Just curious. Dad mentioned some investments not working out. This was a lie, but I had a hunch based on some comments Uncle James had made about helping my parents during the rough patch. Sarah hesitated before responding. Well, I do not like to gossip, but your mother borrowed $5,000 from us last year. Said it was temporary while they waited for some investments to mature. We have not seen it back yet. She paused. And I think the Millers helped them with Rachel's wedding last year, quite substantially. This was interesting information, especially considering my father's well-paid position as a corporate executive and their seemingly luxurious lifestyle. Something did not add up. Back in my hotel room, I called Marcus for moral support. They are even worse than usual, I told him after recounting the day's events. I am seriously considering just leaving before the actual birthday dinner tomorrow. What is stopping you? He asked. I considered the question seriously. I guess part of me still wants to give them one last chance. And honestly, I am curious about these financial issues I am hearing about. Something strange is going on. Just be careful, Marcus warned. They have a way of pulling you back in and then making you feel like crap. Not this time, I promised. I have a contingency plan if things go south tomorrow. After ending the call, I spent several hours on my laptop researching property records, tax liens, and other public financial information related to my family. What I discovered was both surprising and illuminating. It was well past midnight when I finally closed my computer, a clear plan forming in my mind for how to handle whatever the next day might bring. The morning of my father's 60th birthday arrived with picture-perfect Miami weather, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and temperatures in the mid-70s. I dressed casually and headed down to the restaurant where the family was gathering for breakfast before the day's preparations began. Ethan, my mother, acknowledged coolly as I approached their table. We were just discussing the setup for tonight. Rachel has been working so hard to make everything perfect. My sister beamed at the praise. It is going to be amazing. The restaurant has that private room overlooking the water, and I have arranged for a slideshow of family photos throughout the years. I would be happy to help with anything that needs doing, I offered. Rachel waved a dismissive hand. Everything is handled. The professionals know what they are doing. I was thinking I could say a few words tonight, I ventured. A short speech for Dad. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My mother cleared her throat. The program is already quite full, dear. Rachel has organized several speeches from your father's closest friends and family. We would not want to run too long. Closest friends and family, I repeated, and I am not included in that group. That is not what she meant, my father interjected, speaking directly to me for what felt like the first time this trip. It is just that the schedule is already set. I nodded, swallowing my hurt. I understand. By the way, Dad, I have your gift in my room. Would you like it now, or tonight at the dinner? Tonight is fine, he replied already, turning his attention back to his breakfast. After the meal, families dispersed to enjoy the hotel amenities before preparations for the evening would begin. I returned to my room intending to review my contingency plan once more, when I realized I had left my phone charger in my parents' room the previous evening, when I had briefly stopped by to drop off some documents for my father to sign related to the hotel reservations. I knocked on their door, receiving no answer. They were probably at the pool with everyone else. Using the spare key my mother had given me in case of emergency, I let myself in, spotting my charger on the side table immediately. As I retrieved it, my eye caught a stack of papers on my father's desk. Normally, I would never invade someone's privacy by looking at their documents, but a bank letterhead with the words "Final Notice" in bold caught my attention. Below it was a folder labeled Rachel's Accounts and another marked Florida Property Investment. My hand hesitated over the papers. This was wrong. Yet the pieces of the puzzle I had been gathering suggested there was something significant my family was hiding. Making a split-second decision, I quickly scanned through the documents. What I found shocked me to my core. My father, the successful executive, was on the verge of bankruptcy. The family home had a second mortgage there, were multiple maxed-out credit cards, and worst of all, it appeared that a significant portion of his retirement fund had been emptied. Even more disturbing were the documents related to Rachel. Based on what I was seeing, my sister had been given power of attorney over my father's main investment account 2 years ago and had systematically withdrawn nearly $300,000. The Florida property investment folder contained nothing but brochures, no actual investments or properties. A separate bank statement showed regular large withdrawals from my mother's personal account to something called Paradise Entertainment, which a quick Google search revealed was a chain of casinos. I carefully replaced everything exactly as I had found it and left the room, my mind racing. The picture was becoming clearer. My family's finances were in shambles, likely due to my mother's apparent gambling habit and my sister's misappropriation of funds. No wonder they had been borrowing money from friends and acquaintances. And suddenly my exclusion from family affairs made perfect sense. I was the only one who might have the financial expertise to spot what was happening and the moral compass to object to it. In the hallway, I nearly collided with my sister, who was coming out of her room. "What were you doing in Mom and Dad's room?" she demanded, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Forgot my charger," I replied, holding it up as evidence. "Big night tonight. You must be excited to have organized everything." She seemed to relax slightly at the compliment. "Yes, well, someone had to do it. You are never around, so naturally it fell to me." "I noticed I am seated at the corner table," I said, casually, "with Great Aunt Mildred and Cousin David." A flash of surprise crossed her face before she recovered. The seating chart was complicated. We had to consider many factors, like ensuring I am as far from Dad as possible, despite flying 9 hours to be here and paying for half the family's hotel rooms. Her expression hardened. "Not everything is about you, Ethan. This is Dad's night. If you were really here for him rather than to show off how successful you are, you would not be complaining about where you are sitting." It was a masterclass in manipulation, twisting my legitimate grievance into evidence of my selfishness. The old Ethan would have apologized, felt guilty and retreated, but armed with what I now knew, I simply smiled. "You are right. It is Dad's night, and I am going to make sure it is memorable." The confusion on her face as I walked away was almost worth the price of admission. Later that afternoon, I encountered Cousin David in the hotel lobby. Unlike most of the family, David had always been straightforward with me. He was the black sheep of Uncle Peter's branch of the family, creative, nonconformist, and perpetually cash-strapped due to his commitment to documentary filmmaking rather than a traditional career. "Hey man," he greeted me with a fist bump. "Heard we are table buddies tonight at the loser corner." I laughed, despite myself. "Looks that way. Rachel's special touch." "She is something else," he agreed. "You know she tried to borrow 10 grand from me last month. Me of all people. Said it was for a real estate investment opportunity. When I told her I could barely pay my rent, she suggested I ask my production company for an advance. This confirmed my suspicions even further. Did she approach anyone else for money that you know of?" David nodded. "Pretty much everyone in the family. Uncle James gave her his boat fund savings. Emma's husband wrote her a check because she said your dad needed emergency surgery that insurance would not cover." "There was no surgery," I said quietly. "Yeah, I figured that out when I saw your dad water skiing yesterday." We shared a knowing look, and in that moment I made a decision. "David, would you be willing to help me with something tonight? I might need an ally." He did not hesitate. "After the way they have treated you, absolutely. What do you need?" I explained part of my plan. Not everything, but enough that he understood his role. He listened intently, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Count me in," he said when I finished. It is about time someone called them out. With David's assistance secured, I returned to my room to prepare for the evening. I spent time carefully organizing the digital evidence I had gathered on my phone, making sure everything was easily accessible. I laid out my most expensive suit, a charcoal Tom Ford that I had purchased to celebrate my last promotion. Tonight was not about blending in, it was about standing my ground. 2 hours before the dinner, I arrived at the restaurant early, having arranged a meeting with the manager. The upscale seafood establishment had a reputation for discretion and excellence, which was exactly what I needed. Mr. Morrison, the manager, greeted me warmly. "Your sister has arranged everything beautifully for your father's celebration. What else can we assist with?" I explained my additional requirements: access to the restaurant's projection system for a surprise tribute, and some specific timing for service elements. The manager was accommodating, particularly after I slipped him a $100 bill and hinted that the evening might include some family drama. "We are used to emotional family events," he assured me. "Everything will be handled with discretion." With all pieces in place, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for what would either be a complete disaster or a long overdue reckoning. The oceanside restaurant was Miami luxury personified. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic crystal chandeliers, casting a warm glow over white-clothed tables and attentive staff who seemed to anticipate needs before they were expressed. In the private room, Rachel had reserved a long table for 20, occupied the center with several smaller round tables positioned around the perimeter. I arrived 15 minutes early, watching as the staff made final adjustments to the place settings and floral arrangements. Everything was immaculate, exactly as my image-conscious family would want it. Family members began arriving in small groups, greeting each other with hugs and exclamations about the beautiful venue. I stood near the entrance, offering congratulations to my father whenever he was momentarily separated from his adoring entourage. "Quite a place Rachel found," I commented. "She has excellent taste," he replied, his eyes surveying the room with approval. "Reminds me of that restaurant in Chicago where we celebrated my promotion to VP. I remembered that dinner well. I had been 15 and left at home because it was an adult event. Looking back, that exclusion was just one in a long pattern that had continued into my adulthood. As more guests arrived, I noticed people checking the seating chart and finding their assigned places. Sure enough, my name card was at the small round table in the far corner, positioned behind a large decorative column that partially obscured the view of the main table. My dinner companions would be Great-Aunt Mildred, who was now examining her silverware through a pocket magnifying glass, and Cousin David, who gave me a subtle thumbs up from across the room. Rachel was working the room like a professional event planner, directing people to their seats, accepting compliments on the decorations, and periodically shooting triumphant glances in my direction. Our mother followed in her wake, adding her own commentary and basking in the reflected glory of her daughter's organizational prowess. When it was time to be seated for dinner, I made my way to my assigned table, without complaint, helping Great-Aunt Mildred with her chair. "Who are you again?" she asked, loudly, peering at me through thick glasses. "Ethan, Aunt Mildred, Robert's son." "Robert does not have a son," she declared confidently. "Just the daughter, the pretty one." I exchanged glances with David, who rolled his eyes sympathetically. From our corner location, we had a partial view of the proceedings at the main table. My father sat at the center with my mother on one side and Rachel on the other. Uncle James, who had given me a apologetic look when he saw my seating assignment, was placed several chairs away from the place of honor. The first betrayal came during my father's opening toast. He stood champagne glass in hand and thanked everyone for coming to celebrate this milestone birthday. "I want to especially thank my beautiful wife Margaret for 40 wonderful years, and my daughter Rachel for organizing this perfect evening. Family is everything to me, and I am blessed to have the best family a man could ask for." No mention of his son, who had flown 9 hours and spent thousands of dollars to be there. Not even a cursory acknowledgement. I saw Uncle James frown and whisper something to Aunt Patricia, who shook her head slightly. The second betrayal came from my mother during the first course. As conversations flowed around the room, she raised her voice to ensure it carried to nearby tables. "Rachel tells me your company is doing very well, Ethan. Finally making use of that expensive education your father paid for. Though I always thought you would follow him into something more substantial than playing with computers all day." Several relatives chuckled, interpreting this as good-natured family teasing rather than the deliberate diminishment it was. I maintained my composure, focusing on my appetizer rather than responding to the bait. Uncle Peter, who had always taken his cues from my parents regarding how to treat me loudly, mentioned how generous Rachel had been to upgrade everyone's hotel experience, conveniently forgetting who had actually paid for the rooms. "Such a thoughtful daughter," he proclaimed, always thinking of ways to make things special for her parents. The servers had just cleared the main course when Rachel accidentally bumped into my chair while walking past, causing me to spill water on my suit jacket. "Oh, sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "You might want to blot that before it stains, though it might be hard to tell on such a basic suit." I dabbed at the water with my napkin, saying nothing. The old familiar hurt was there, but now it was accompanied by a cool, clear determination. I checked my watch. 20 minutes until dessert would be served, the moment I had arranged with the restaurant manager for my surprise. The breaking point came when Rachel clinked her glass to call for attention, announcing it was time for speeches from family and friends. One by one, she called up my father's golf buddies, her own husband, and various relatives to share anecdotes and congratulations. Conspicuously absent was any invitation for me to speak. As the speeches concluded, and servers began preparing to bring out the elaborate birthday cake, Rachel returned to the microphone for a final announcement. "And now, before cake, I want to thank everyone who actually cares about Dad for being here tonight. This is the family that matters." Her eyes found mine across the room, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. The implication was clear. I was not part of that category. As she returned to her seat beside our father, she leaned over and whispered something in my mother's ear. They both glanced in my direction and laughed softly. My mother nodded in agreement to whatever had been said. That was when David, playing his role perfectly loudly, asked me, "So Ethan, how does it feel to fly all this way and get stuck at the reject table?" His voice carried in the momentary lull between speeches and the cake presentation. Several heads turned our way, including my father's. Rachel, ever quick to control the narrative, laughed dismissively. "Oh, David, always the dramatic one. Ethan understands we had to prioritize the people Dad is closest to at the main table." I looked directly at my sister, my voice calm but clear enough to be heard by nearby tables. "Is that why you seated me behind a column after I flew 9 hours to be here and paid for half the family's hotel rooms?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the nearest tables. Rachel's smile became fixed. "No one forced you to do that," she said sharply. "If you are going to hold your financial contributions over our heads, maybe you should not have offered." "I did it because I care about Dad," I replied. "Why did you tell people I might not even come?" My mother interjected, her voice carrying that familiar note of martyrdom. "Ethan, this is not the time or place for one of your scenes. This night is about your father, not your need for attention." "When is it ever about anyone but him? Or Rachel?" I asked quietly. "When have any of you ever made space for me in this family?" My sister's composed facade cracked slightly. "Maybe if you were actually likable, people would want you around more." "No one actually likes you, Ethan. They just feel bad for you." Several gasps sounded around the room. Even for our family, this level of open cruelty was shocking. My mother, rather than admonishing Rachel for her harshness, simply nodded. "You are not even supposed to be here. I told your father not to invite you, but he insisted out of some misplaced obligation." Complete silence fell over the room. Even the servers had stopped moving, frozen in place by the unexpected family drama unfolding before them. In that silence, with perfect clarity and calmness, I raised my water glass high enough for everyone to see. 20 seconds, I said. Confusion crossed my family's faces. "What is that supposed to mean?" Rachel demanded. I simply smiled and began counting silently, watching as different expressions played across the faces of various family members. At 5 seconds, Cousin Emma suddenly covered her mouth, her eyes widening in realization. She had been present during a conversation last Christmas when I had mentioned discovering financial irregularities at my company and reporting them to the authorities. "Always follow the money," I had said to her then. "It tells the real story." At 10 seconds, Uncle James stood abruptly, recognition dawning on his face. He had confided in me yesterday about the money Rachel had borrowed from him, money he now suspected he would never see again. At 20 seconds, my mother's face went completely still, the color draining from her cheeks as she whispered almost inaudibly, "It is true. He knows." The room remained eerily silent as I stood up straightening my water-spotted suit jacket. With deliberate calmness, I walked to the front of the room where Rachel had been standing for her speeches. The restaurant manager, right on cue, handed me a small remote control. "Dad," I began, looking directly at my father, whose confusion was giving way to concern. "I want to wish you a happy 60th birthday. Milestones like these often make us reflective about our lives and relationships. They can also be moments of truth." I pressed a button on the remote, and the large screen that had earlier displayed Rachel's photo montage now showed a spreadsheet, a detailed accounting of my father's retirement fund over the past 3 years. 3 years ago, you gave Rachel power of attorney over your finances, supposedly to help manage your investments while you focused on your final years at the company. I clicked to the next slide, which highlighted a series of large withdrawals. Since then, $300,000 has been systematically removed from your retirement accounts. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. My father's face had gone pale, his eyes darting between the screen and Rachel, who had suddenly found intense interest in her napkin. "Where did the money go?" I continued, clicking to the next slide. "Not to any real estate investments in Florida, despite what many of you were told when Rachel approached you for loans to supplement these fictional investments." Uncle James spoke up from his seat. "You told me the $20,000 I gave you was for a down payment on a beachfront property that would triple in value." Others began chiming in. Aunt Patricia, Uncle Peter, even Cousin Emma's husband, all revealing substantial sums they had invested with Rachel based on various misrepresentations. My father finally found his voice. "Rachel, what is this?" My sister's face had transformed from smug superiority to panicked calculation. "Ethan is twisting things, Dad. I made some investments that have not paid off yet, but they will. He is just jealous because you trusted me with your finances instead of him." I clicked to the next slide, which showed bank statements from Rachel's personal account. These are deposits matching exactly the withdrawals from Dad's retirement fund, followed by transfers to accounts for a luxury car dealership, a high-end clothing store, and the mortgage on a vacation property in the Bahamas, registered solely in Rachel's name. "You went through my personal bank records." Rachel shrieked, finding righteous indignation her best defense. "That is illegal." "Actually, these are public records I accessed legally," I clarified. "The mortgage information is public record, as are property tax statements. I simply followed the money trail." I turned my attention to my mother, who was now clutching my father's arm with white knuckles. "And then there is the matter of the second mortgage on the family home taken out 18 months ago, the funds from which appear to correspond with regular withdrawals to various casinos through a shell account called Paradise Entertainment." My mother's face crumpled. My father looked at her in disbelief. "Margaret, you have been gambling." She began to cry softly. "It was just supposed to be a little fun, and then I needed to win back what I had lost. They kept saying I was due for a big win." The room had erupted into shocked conversations. David had moved to stand beside me, a show of solidarity that I deeply appreciated. Uncle James was now standing near my father, a hand on his shoulder. "I tried to tell you something was wrong," Uncle James said quietly to my father, "but you were so proud of Rachel's supposed investment acumen." My father looked utterly devastated, the carefully constructed image of his perfect family and secure retirement disintegrating before his eyes on his 60th birthday. Rachel made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This is ridiculous. Ethan comes back after years of absence and thinks he can just destroy our family with these accusations. He has always been jealous of my relationship with you, Dad. This is just his way of getting attention." I shook my head sadly. "This is not about attention, Rachel. It is about the truth. About Dad knowing what has really happened to his life savings before it is too late to recover anything." I clicked to a final slide, a recording interface. "And if there is any doubt about motivations, I have one last piece of evidence." I pressed play, and Rachel's voice filled the room. "We need to keep Ethan away from Dad's financial information at all costs. If he figures out what we have been doing with the retirement money, he will ruin everything. Make sure he is seated as far from everyone as possible at the dinner. We need this weekend to go perfectly so we can get Dad to sign over the lake house before he realizes the main accounts are nearly empty." My mother's voice responded, "He should never have been invited in the first place." I told Robert not to, but he insisted. Just keep him distracted and isolated. No one really wants him here anyway. I stopped the recording which I had captured accidentally when picking up my phone charger from their room. I had left my phone recording while searching for the charger, never expecting to capture such an incriminating conversation. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely. My mother had buried her face in her hands. My father slowly stood, his expression, a complex mixture of anger, betrayal, and crushing disappointment. For the first time, that expression was not directed at me. "How could you do this?" he asked, looking between my mother and sister. "All these years I worked to provide for this family, to secure our future, and you have been systematically destroying it behind my back." "Daddy, I can explain." Rachel began, her voice taking on the little girl quality she had always used to manipulate him. "No," he cut her off firmly. "I do not think you can." Uncle James stepped forward. "Robert, I think we should continue this conversation privately, perhaps in your hotel room, not in front of everyone." My father nodded numbly, the proud man I had known all my life suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. As the family began to disperse in shocked groups, Uncle James approached me. "You did the right thing, Ethan. It could not have been easy." It was not, I admitted. But he deserved to know the truth, even if the timing was painful. Several other family members approached, some apologetic for their past treatment of me, others simply stunned by the revelations. Cousin David clapped me on the shoulder. "That was one hell of a birthday surprise," he said, "but long overdue." As people filed out, my father remained seated at the now empty main table, staring into his untouched glass of champagne. After a moment's hesitation, I approached him. "Dad, I am sorry it had to happen this way." He looked up at me, really seeing me, perhaps for the first time in years. "Why did you do it, Ethan? Why expose all this tonight on my birthday in front of everyone?" "Because for years I have been the family scapegoat, excluded and dismissed. Tonight was just the culmination, being seated at the corner table, openly told I was unwanted and unliked by my own mother and sister. The truth needed to come out before they took everything from you." He nodded slowly. "I have not been a good father to you." It was a simple statement, but one I had waited 30 years to hear. "No," I agreed quietly. "You have not." "I do not know what happens next," he admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about my life seems to be built on lies." "You start over," I suggested, "with the truth as your foundation this time." He considered this for a long moment before asking, "Will you help me sort through all this financial mess? You always were good with numbers." It was not quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement of my value, something I had never received from him before. "I will," I promised, "but things will need to be different between us." He nodded again, understanding passing between us. "They will be. They already are." The remainder of that night passed in a blur of private family conversations, tears, and revelations. Rachel had stormed out of the restaurant after her initial denials failed, taking her husband with her. My mother had retreated to her hotel room, allegedly suffering from a sudden migraine that prevented her from facing the consequences of her actions. I returned to my own room well past midnight, emotionally exhausted but feeling a strange sense of lightness. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood my ground with my family, refused to accept their mistreatment, and forced the truth into the open. The next morning, a knock on my door revealed my father, looking haggard but determined. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Perhaps over breakfast." We found a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant away from the other guests, who were still buzzing with gossip about the previous night's dramatic dinner. "I stayed up all night going through the financial documents you found." My father began stirring his coffee absently. "It is worse than you showed. Nearly everything is gone." "I suspected as much," I replied. "The withdrawals were accelerating in recent months." He nodded grimly. "Rachel must have realized I would eventually notice, and was trying to empty the accounts before I did. She even had me sign papers for a reverse mortgage on the house last month, claiming it was a refinance to lower our payments. The systematic deception was even more extensive than I had realized." "What will you do now?" I asked. He looked up from his coffee, a new resolve in his eyes. "Start over, I suppose." I will need to postpone retirement for one thing. Sell the house, certainly. Your mother. He trailed off, the pain evident in his voice. She has agreed to get help for her gambling. Whether our marriage survives, this remains to be seen. And Rachel? His expression hardened. I have consulted with a lawyer this morning. What she did was not just a betrayal, it was criminal. Fraud at minimum, possibly elder abuse given the power of attorney situation. I never thought I would have to consider pressing charges against my own daughter, but here we are. I reached across the table, placing my hand on his arm, a gesture of support I had rarely offered before. Whatever you decide, I will back you. Even after how we have treated you all these years, he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Family is complicated, I replied. But I am not helping you out of some misplaced family obligation. I am doing it because it is the right thing to do, and because I see you making an effort to change. Over the next few days, the extended family departed Miami, the birthday celebration thoroughly overshadowed by the financial scandal. I extended my stay to help my father begin untangling the mess that had been made of his finances. We established clear boundaries from the start. I would provide assistance and expertise, but not financial bailouts. He would need to face the consequences of his decades of enabling Rachel and my mother's behavior, including significant lifestyle changes. I can help you create a plan to rebuild over the next 5 to 7 years, I explained as we reviewed his remaining assets. You will need to continue working downsize significantly and pursue legal remedies to recover what you can from Rachel. And your mother's gambling debts, he asked quietly. Those are more complicated. Some may be legally uncollectible, but ethically they should be repaid over time. It depends on whether you stay together and what her recovery looks like. He nodded, accepting these harsh realities with a new humility that would have been unthinkable before. When it came time for me to return to Seattle, our goodbye was different from any we had shared before. Instead of the perfunctory handshake that had been our standard, my father pulled me into an embrace. Thank you, he said simply. Not just for the help, but for the wake-up call. It should not have taken this to make me see what was happening right in front of me, both with my finances and with how we treated you. Better late than never, I replied, returning the hug somewhat awkwardly. On the flight home, I had time to reflect on the dramatic shift in my family dynamics. The 9-hour journey that had earlier felt like a burden now gave me valuable space to process everything that had happened. Rachel had not spoken to me since the revelation, sending only a venomous text accusing me of destroying the family out of jealousy. I had blocked her number without responding. Some relationships were beyond repair, and I had made peace with that fact. My mother had made a tearful, somewhat self-serving apology before I left, blaming her behavior on the stress of hiding her gambling addiction. I had accepted it politely, but without illusions about immediate reconciliation. Trust once shattered so completely would take years to rebuild, if it ever could be. With other family members, the experience had been illuminating. Uncle James and I had formed a stronger bond, with plans for him to visit Seattle in the summer. Cousin David and I had exchanged contact information with genuine intentions to stay in touch. Even Aunt Patricia had approached me with a new respect, apologizing for years of following my parents' lead in how they treated me. 6 months after the fateful birthday dinner, my life had changed in ways I could not have anticipated. My father called weekly, our conversations still sometimes awkward, but increasingly genuine. He had sold the family home and moved into a modest apartment, continuing to work while building a new post-retirement plan. My mother had entered a treatment program for gambling addiction and was, according to my father, making sincere efforts to change. Rachel had fled to the Bahamas when criminal charges related to the financial exploitation became imminent. Last I heard, her husband had filed for divorce after discovering she had secretly remortgaged their home as well. As for me, the confidence that came from finally standing up to my family had spilled over into other areas of my life. I had received a significant promotion at work, partly due to my more assertive communication style. I had even started dating Sarah, a software developer I had met at a conference, someone who valued me for exactly who I was, rather than constantly finding me lacking. The most significant change, however, was internal. The weight of seeking approval from people who were incapable of giving it had lifted. I no longer measured my worth through my family's distorted lens. understanding that their treatment of me had always been about their own issues rather than any deficiency on my part. On my 31st birthday, I received a small package from my father. Inside was his own father's watch, a family heirloom I had always admired but assumed would go to Rachel. The note accompanying it was simple: to my son who had the courage to speak the truth when it would have been easier to remain silent. I am proud of the man you have become, largely without my help. I hope to spend the years ahead earning the right to be a part of your life. Love, Dad. It was not a perfect resolution. Life rarely offers those. Some relationships had been irreparably broken, others permanently altered. But in standing up for myself that night at the corner table, I had finally broken free from the role I had been assigned in my family's dysfunction. The truth, painful as it was, had ultimately set us all free to either change or face the consequences of remaining the same. And in that freedom, I had found something I had sought my entire life: the knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was, corner table and all. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who treated you unfairly? What did you do, and how did it change your relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more tales of family dynamics and personal growth. Remember that sometimes the most painful moments in our lives can lead to the greatest healing if we have the courage to face the truth. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to stand up for yourself when it matters most.